So for the last couple of months, the Actors and Writers of America have been on strike, effectively putting a ton of movies, shows, and more on halt. It's the first time in 60 years that both the actors and writers are striking together. And as someone who's getting more and more involved in the media space, I wanted to figure out exactly why. Is it as simple as the actors and writers just want more money? Contracts! Now! Is it as simple as their contracts aren't fair anymore? And if so, why aren't the studios agreeing with them? And as someone who believes in the goodness of humanity, I can't accept that this is just because of greed, right? Well, in this video, I'm on the mission to find the full story to why this strike is even happening. Because so far on the internet, there's so many opinions, and I'd like to attempt to be an independent thinker. We talked to a SAG-AFTRA negotiator, look into multiple documents and financials. We scraped the internet to find all the supporters and all the critics to answer the question, what is true and what is not? The journey begins here, answering the question, so you might be wondering, where am I? Well, I live in an 800 square foot New York City apartment with 2 other content creators, and so sometimes my normal room isn't available. Anyway, welcome to a roof that now on further inspection is probably caving in. Let's carry on. On Friday, August 4th, I decided to go to the SAG-AFTRA strike in New York City. All right, we just arrived to the SAG-AFTRA strike. It's a little bit out of my comfort zone. I don't know what to expect. It seems to be right there. Dude, what do we do, man? Should we give up? My goal was to find at least one person who was willing to answer some difficult questions. And luckily, I got in touch with Erin Fritsch, an actor. Good. This is my first time at one of the strikes.
Okay, I'm Erin.
I said Erin Tages. Pleasure.
Today, though, she's also the strike captain and part of the TV Theatrical Negotiation Committee. There couldn't have been a more perfect person to talk to.
Hello.
Hello.
What's your name?
My name is Erin Fritsch.
For people that don't really know what's going on, what is the root cause of why the strike is happening?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's no surprise that the industry has changed drastically over the last several years. Just ask anybody how they consume content today. You know, you're gone are the days of kind of waiting for you must-see TV on Thursday nights and watching broadcast television. The majority of people consume their media through streaming platforms.
You and I underestimated how much of a disruption that streaming became in this long-standing entertainment industry. For decades, advertisements were the lifeblood of TV and movies. Think about it, when you watch TV on cable, you'd have 3 to 5 ads in between the episode. And go watch a movie in a theater, you're bombarded with 20 ads before the movie even starts. This made associating revenue and that show very easy. It was direct. Let's just say an episode of Criminal Minds usually gets 5 million views. Well, the network can then easily sell ads that are worth 5 million views on that show. So when it comes to paying your actors and writers, well, it was easy. They get a piece of the revenue their show made. And so let's just say that this episode of Criminal Minds runs 5 years later on cable and generates ad revenue. Well, the actors and writers of that episode get paid their percentage. These payments are called residuals, and because actors and writers may not know when exactly their next project is, these become crucial for their income. It's what pays the bills when they're not working or in between projects. And so this model worked great until, well, streaming came along. And what did streaming famously do? Well, it killed the ad business. For a monthly subscription price, the viewer got unlimited content on demand. There now was this pool of money and shows, but how do you associate them? This money didn't come from these shows, it came from over here. So now in the case that these people rerun this episode of Criminal Minds over and over again, how do we know what money from this pile of subscription cash goes to these actors and writers?
A lot of these platforms were built and created by tech companies, not traditional media companies. And we believe that our contract that's been around for decades really doesn't serve this new model.
So all this raises a few questions. One, are these streaming platforms really not paying any residuals? And if so, is it because they can't afford to? And most importantly of all, what is their response to this whole situation? Well, I knew this was going to be a deep research video, one where I needed to go into the finances and lengthy documents to find the truth. I dropped out of school, so I called a familiar friend to help out with this.
Craig, man, people loved you from the Dobrik video. I had to call you up again.
I'm honored.
So Craig, is it true that these streaming services aren't paying any residuals?
So technically they are paying residuals, but it is much less to what actors and writers were used to in the Cablevision days. So an interesting case study actually on these residuals is Whitney Morgan Cox, who's an actor on Criminal Minds. So Criminal Minds is on cable TV, right? And she's getting these residuals, she's getting these checks are coming in and they're significant and she's happy. Well, then Criminal Minds goes to Netflix and the checks are much less. So much to the point that she says in an interview that the checks stop coming because there's nothing significant. Well, lucky enough for her, Criminal Minds goes back onto cable. She said in the interview that she's excited, the checks start coming again. Well, ultimately, Criminal Minds ends up going back to Netflix and the checks, she says, stop coming again. So it's to the point that it's not even like the checks are coming once they switch to Netflix. So although they do pay residuals, they're not significant.
Dang, it's that drastic. I mean, you mentioned Netflix. Is it because they can't afford to?
To answer that question, I think we should go to the spreadsheets. Let me, oh wait, give me a second, I need to.
Wait, Craig, what are you doing?
Give me 1 second.
What? Are these holograms?
I learned this a long time ago. I've been in spreadsheets for my whole life. Here.
I learned spreadsheets when you did.
There you go. First thing I want to walk you through here, Tejas, is Netflix's revenue growth. I went back to 2018 and found that in 2018, $15 billion of revenue, and they've, significantly grown that up until 2022 last year with over $30 billion of revenue. So revenue growth has been great.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Let me get this other graph up.
Craig, is this what you learned in Accounting 405?
As you can see, Netflix has been profitable. In 2018, they recorded over $1 billion in profits, all the way up to 2022, when they recorded a little bit shy of $5 billion in profits. And they're actually projected to be well north of $5 billion in profits in 2023. Long story short, Netflix is very profitable and their revenues continue to grow.
Now, although Netflix is profitable, it should be mentioned that it's because they were a first mover. Most other streaming platforms aren't making a profit like this. They're still trying to get as much market share as possible. For example, it's estimated that Peacock is on track to lose $3 billion this year. Okay, so I know Netflix is profitable right now, but one of the main arguments is because of increased competition, they're not going to be able to license other networks' content. For example, they can't just get Game of Thrones now, which is owned by HBO, because HBO is just going to put it on their own streaming platform, Max. So doesn't this make production way more expensive?
Great question, Tejas. So I've got another spreadsheet. I actually have this one on file. Let me go ahead and show it to you. Here.
Oh, Craig, what? Where are you learning this stuff?
As you can see on this graph, I just divided the cost of revenue by the total revenue, and it's weirdly consistent. I mean, I put this on the graph and you can see it's basically a straight line. All this tells us is that although the cost to produce the content is getting higher, they're able to raise their subscription fees and keep it so that Netflix stays profitable.
Wow, really? Okay, so Netflix is making money and their future looks bright, but I know what some of you are thinking. There might not be ads on these shows, but can't they measure the success of them anyway and pay residuals based off of that? For example, let's just say that this show got 5 million views, this one got 3 million views, and this one 2 million. Can't the studios just pay a part of this pool of subscription cash based on those proportions? Well, in theory, yes. These platforms obviously have the data on which shows are successful, but practically, they'll never do that. Why? Well, stakeholders. How much of this problem is that streaming services aren't giving out the numbers like they used to do back in the cable television?
Yeah, I mean, they've never, the companies know this information. This is knowable information, viewership, and also value. They know. They've got the algorithms, they just don't want to share.
Totally. And why do you think that is?
Well, it's a competition. Now, you've got Apple, you've got Amazon, you've got Netflix. So they're all competitors. And so,
In order for this to happen, we need to know what these splits are. And unfortunately, these streaming platforms are decentivized to share this because it may drop their share price, or it's going to share information to their competitors that they don't want them to know. Oh, okay, roommates look like they're done. Let's make it happen. As we know, the advent of streaming killed the ad business, basically the way traditional media ran for decades. And what did this do? Well, it made the career for actors and writers unsustainable. How? For one, something I actually haven't touched on yet is that streaming actually created less opportunity for actors and writers in Hollywood. Vox made this incredible video explaining why specifically, but in summary, streaming made seasons go from 22 episodes down to 8, making actors and writers have to find multiple jobs just to work full time. And on top of this, they've slowed down things like writers' rooms, where writers were able to learn from more experienced folks like showrunners and producers. Most writers now are just working by themselves in their apartments. There's no room to grow. But more so, this unsustainability comes from a lack of residuals. We learned from Aaron that it's because studios are de-incentivized to share these numbers because of competition, but I knew this couldn't be the only reason. And so far, all we've heard is from the union side. What have the studios said themselves, and what is their response? This was one of the hardest parts of this project, finding any response from the AMPTP. Luckily though, Craig was able to find this document in the ocean that we call the internet that was literally perfect. They counter every single one of SAG-AFTRA's proposals, titling it What SAG-AFTRA Failed to Mention. So what do they have to say on why they're not paying out residuals? Well, 3 main reasons. Number 1, the union's proposal does not follow the money. They argue that actors and writers are not entitled to this streaming cash. Number 2, any third-party attempt to figure out these metrics wouldn't be accurate. They say the only legitimate way to see the performance of these shows is through them, which we've already said they're not willing to share. But number 3, they argue that the union wants to create a residual that only shares in the successes, but not in the failure. That's not sharing. I'll have this document linked below for those interested in the specifics of these 2 arguments and all their other rebuttals. But for now, I want to focus on this third one because I find it quite fascinating. It comes down to business philosophy. I remember once hearing about an example of a pencil factory back when I was in school. An employee notices that the company he works for is doing really well. They're making a lot of profit, and he believes he deserves more pay. He believes he deserves a piece of that profit, so he goes up to the owner and says, "I'm the one making these pencils. Without me, all you would have is just a bunch of graphite and wood. I deserve to be paid more. I deserve a piece of the profit." The owner takes this all in, assures that the employee has done great work, and then responds with, "Without this business, you wouldn't have a job. At the end of the day, I'm the one taking on the risk if this company fails. For example, if it goes bankrupt, that debt falls on me, not you. Because I took a higher risk, I get to share in higher rewards." Just because a company makes a profit like Netflix and their $5 billion doesn't mean they're obligated to pay their employees any of that. Instead, that money goes on to the stakeholders of the business because they're the one who took on the risk of that business existing in the first place. And this seems to be the main premise to why studios don't want to create a new media residual model. The actors and writers aren't taking a financial risk if their project fails. Therefore, they shouldn't share in the success of it. So this model can expand further. The strike has a lot more details, but for us everyday Joes, this is the big picture. This is why Hollywood is currently bleeding billions of dollars for the first time in 60 years. It's why actors and writers are demanding change, and why studios are responding in the way they are. This whole thing was my first introduction to a union, my first introduction to a strike. And transparently, before this project, I don't really understand them, and honestly a little afraid of them because on social media, I only ever saw the extremes. But through all this research and actually going to one, I've realized that we as a society, we need unions. They serve as this checks and balance to capitalist societies. And through SAG-AFTRA's fights, they've so far negotiated over $1 billion in wage increases, and at the very least, brought attention to a massive hole in this streaming business model. My goal for this video and channel at large is to be able to take these complex topics and be able to investigate, research, and package them in a video that is not just a repeat of online echo chambers. And I hope I did that, but in case I missed something, please let me know in the comments below. This being like my first ever strike or any sort of protest, there's one thing that's certain, it's everyone here is so passionate about what they're doing, and respectfully so. I'm just kind of in awe. Okay, cool. Also, I'm not holding this camera. I thought it just looked like a cool shot. Subscribe.